One factor you didn't mention was the role of the Philippines publicizing these events, both through embedding reporters or just taking their own pictures and video and releasing it to the public, something that of course, at the Sea Light have called an assertive transparency campaign. Your mileage may vary. What has been the role of this in, one, escalating the situation? Clearly, it has not, at this point, deterred China. And what has been the effect both in the Philippines and on China of this campaign?
So I do not find much evidence for the argument that the Philippine Transparency Initiative uh, in any way caused the current level of tensions between China and the Philippines. Certainly didn't cause Second Thomas Shoal. You go back and you look at the AIS signatures and the satellite imagery, and you see that China began these blockades well before the Philippines started publicizing them. The Philippines publicized this behavior, and it did two things, I think. One, it clearly rallied international support. The Philippines, since President Marcos came into power in July of 2022, the Philippines has almost tripled the number of states publicly endorsing the 2016 arbitration award and supporting Philippine claims. It has developed new defense relationships with half a dozen states, with more on the way. It has clearly garnered the Philippines' international sympathy and diplomatic support, and that is hugely valuable. Second, and we can never, there's a problem with deterrence. How do you prove deterrence worked? Nothing happened. China hasn't ripped the Sierra Madre off the reef. It hasn't sunk a Philippine boat. It hasn't killed a Philippine sailor. Does part of that derive from the fact that they would have had to do it on live TV, broadcast around the world? I think probably. But yes, it has also perhaps hardened China's position once we were well into this. So I think what you probably saw by, say, the spring of 2024 is that the transparency initiative on the Philippine side probably reached a point of diminishing returns. You had, rallied about as much support as you could. You were putting out information so frequently that I think people were becoming numb to it, including within the Philippines. Public opinion polling suggested that people were just losing interest because they couldn't maintain that level of outrage. And so the Philippine government did the smart thing. They revisited the policy. They began, they shifted around the way that they were going to get this information out. They started letting China be the first mover, and then they responded. And that's continued to today. So, if you look just at Second Thomas, the Transparency Initiative helped rally pressure on China and deter aggression. And then when it was no longer useful, they quietly negotiated a provisional arrangement and have kept quiet since. That seems pretty deft to me.
So what do you think is the next step then for China? It seems in some ways they want to maintain the status quo where Philippines can't perfect their claim to any of these features, but they won't necessarily build on them themselves. And maybe that's the best outcome we can hope for.
So, not something I have a reputation for, but I'm actually a bit of an optimist on this.
Oh, stop it.
AMPI, yeah, AMPI has spent a decade tracking activity in the South China Sea, and every year for that decade, or at least for its first 7 years, I could confidently present metrics by which China had gained more control of the waters, seabed, and airspace every year. I haven't been able to find a metric by which China's gained any more control for 3 years. Since 2021, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Indonesia have all pushed back on strategically important oil and gas projects despite CCG harassment, and the Philippines has managed to not only replenish but repair the Sierra Madre despite the largest Chinese blockade effort we've ever seen here. China is strategically flailing. It has, I think, two contradictory demands coming from Beijing. One, stop these resupply missions, stop this oil and gas activity, stop this fishing. But two, you can't use military force because we don't like the escalation risk. And yet, the gray zone stuff isn't working anymore. The Philippines and the other claimants have shown that you can actually stand up to Chinese harassment. And that the only way China is actually going to be able to stop this activity is by using military force. Now, that is extremely dangerous these quote non-lethal activities are only non-lethal in a statistical sense. Eventually, if you keep it up, you will kill somebody. Which is what nearly happened on June 17th at Second Thomas, which is why China got scared and negotiated the provisional arrangement with the Philippines. At Sabina, I don't know. We're in a now quite dangerous position. There's no way that China comes out of this with its overall strategic situation in the South China Sea improved any. It might actually end up killing somebody at Sabina and triggering the MDT, which could put us right into the Cold War that both sides say we're trying to avoid. But look, at the end of the day, I have no solutions to offer here because there are none. Because the only solutions to the South China Sea at the end of the day are a fair and equitable negotiation by China with its neighbors, which is never going to happen under Xi Jinping, unless he has some kind of come to Jesus moment that hasn't been evident for the last 10 years. So all we can hope for in the South China Sea is to tread water, which is unsatisfying, but that's what we do in most thorny geopolitical issues. If anybody's got solutions to cross-strait tensions, North Korea, or peace in the Middle East, I'm open to hearing about them. But we don't, and we don't have solutions to the South China Sea either.